Why come to this place? Not simply to hide. Oh, you have a purpose here. Perhaps you are protecting something. No, protecting someone.
I can't do this anymore. I can't. It's too long. Quit telling your stupid story about the stupid desert and just die already. Die!
Tell me, is it the chosen one? He is.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 80. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. How's it going, John?
Hello, hello.
What's up?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast.
I'm going to need more energy out of you. I'm going to need some more energy.
You going to need more energy? You going to need more energy?
Come on, turn it up.
Give me your energy. Clap, everyone.
We're a Star Wars podcast. We need to be high energy Star Wars podcasting. We got to do it for George. We got to do it for Kathleen. We got to do it for who else? I mean, who else is out there?
At the Star Wars. We
got to do
Star Wars. Yeah.
We got to do it for Woody, man. Woody gave up weed for Star Wars.
Is that high energy enough for you?
Yeah. Okay.
So there's here's something that's been bugging me for several weeks for no reason.
Okay.
So this may have been off the air a couple of weeks ago, but you and I were discussing
as we did.
the genre of music within the Star Wars music that belongs to. It was, I guess, named maybe.
Well, we should give credit where credit is due.
Yes.
We have a lot of listeners in the PDX Portland area, and it was a young 12-year-old by the name of Luke Maxwell.
Young Luke.
He sent us a letter.
He asked us about it.
Yeah,
I guess should we just say what it is on air for people who don't know?
I'll put the E on this. I don't think any kids listen to this podcast.
And even if they do, and they're very susceptible to picking up a Star Wars book and seeing it written there. We're talking about jizz music. Those jizz whalers. Anyway, so yeah, he asked us a question. The question was not one that we
should we read it, or is it
answered on the air? I guess if you want to.
Okay, I brought it up. So here's a question from Luke Maxwell, 12 years old, from Portland, Oregon. He's not really 12, guys. Don't worry about it. I just realized I was going to say something like
we should clarify that
imply that a 12-year-old wrote it.
What he wrote.
Luke is well into his 30s. He's a grown-ass man. So let's not create an illusion that dirty words are coming from kids to our show. Anyway, Luke Maxwell, cartoonist, raconteur extraordinaire.
Yes, I was going to say raconteur.
Exactly. Solo score. So if Lord Miller have any sense, they'll dub their film as, quote, The Sting in Space. But instead of ragtime, they'll score it with jizz music. So they can promote the film by saying such things as, quote, jizz figures prominently into our film. Quote, jizz seeps out of every pore of this movie. Or, quote, Han Solo drinks jizz from a dick. Maybe the last one doesn't work so well, but you get the idea. So we've earned our E this week, but that's the thing. It's somebody made a command decision in Lucasfilm probably 20 plus years ago
to greenlight calling it jizz music. And I'm pretty sure the first time I saw it was in that Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina book.
Yes.
I don't, and that was like 94, 95. I don't know that it had been referred to as such previously, but then I don't think anyone was like writing stories about Big Grandan and the modal nodes prior to that. Sorry,
you go ahead. You actually have a point.
So what has been bugging me and came to mind when I sang that little ditty. But so after we received this email, Robert and I were talking about this term and like whether it's even still used anymore. And sure enough, if you go to the Twitter accounts of both Leland Chee and Paulo Hidalgo, they both are basically saying like you'll never see that word in print again in a Star Wars context. Basically, we don't use that word anymore. But Paulo Hidalgo also said something like it never made sense to him how both the Cantina band music from A New Hope and the Max Rebo band music from Jabba's Palace could possibly belong to the same genre. He just never understood how those could both be called the same thing. That is crazy to me. There's plenty of music in a genre. If you take any genre, you can find any two bands that sound wildly dissimilar, right? Jazz music, for example, right? Benny Goodman doesn't sound like the albums that Herbie Hancock was making in the 1980s, right?
Right.
But those are still both jazz music. So rock and roll, like Chuck Berry just passed away. Chuck Berry doesn't sound, you can find a lot of current bands that do sound like Chuck Berry, but you could also find a lot of bands that don't sound like Chuck Berry and are still considered rock bands. But you don't question oh, that's not rock music. I don't understand how those are the same thing, right? Classical music, you have the medieval Palestrina, Hildegard von Bingen stuff, which sounds a lot different from Wagner, which sounds a lot different from Steve Reich, right? But those, no one says well, these are. Maybe you have some purist or whatever who's unless it was issued on Mr. Edison's wax cylinder, that is not classical music. But genres are big; they have a wide variety of sounds in them, and so for Paulo Hidalgo to say well, he wasn't saying this was the reason why they weren't using that term anymore. I think the reason why they're not using that term anymore is pretty obvious. But for him to be oh, I never understood how this big band jazz and this space disco music were supposed to be the same genre. That happens all the time. That makes total sense. So anyway, that's been bugging me for weeks. I had to get that off my chest.
Well,
I didn't feel like tweeting it at Pablo Hidalgo because he has enough people tweeting him nonsense that I feel like he didn't need to add to it.
You didn't want to accuse him of being a jizz purist.
Yeah, I didn't want to be that guy who's you don't listen to any music at all, do you?
Yeah, I would say that would be an indicator that maybe he was being flippant, or he's not a person who's necessarily he's never studied popular music of any sort on an academic level. Because
I can't remember what I was reading. It was a review of something, but it referred to in a derogatory way. It referred to people whose music tastes span from music from video games to music about video games. and while I don't think that describes Pablo Hidalgo, that his comment does not indicate that he listens to a wide variety of things.
It does kind of bring up the idea of like, as much as when I was a kid, I loved the, Fergan Dion and the Modal Nodes or whatever, the Star Wars Cantina Band, as they've been called.
Right.
I still refer to them, but,
Right.
and I enjoyed the Max Rebo Band and that, even though I think it wasn't until the special edition, it wasn't extended. And I really don't have any love for Jedi Rocks. And to be perfectly,
you're a lapty neck guy.
Yeah. And to be perfectly frank, I did not enjoy, what was the name of the Lin-Manuel Miranda thing from The Force Awakens?
Oh, I don't even remember.
And
it was called like Force Rap or something.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and I'm definitely not. That was like that kind of thing where it's like, if you are going to do that, why don't they go out a little crazy? Why don't they go, one of the fun things.
Jabba Flow, that's what it was
Jabba
called.
Flow. And it's just like that whole idea that when John Williams came up with that, I mean, was obviously a riff on the Benny Goodman stuff that, I don't even remember the timeline. There was a thing around that time, because of the disco era, that they were constantly trying to mine stuff and discoize it. And in some ways, that's kind of what it was, because they didn't use pure instrumentation from the big band era. It was like maybe synthesized bass, and there was a kind of a certain tonality to the music, which it was like, it sounded like Benny Goodman, but there was a kind of a metallic overtone to it. Anyway, my point is that subsequent movies, they never kind of took that away from it. And it would just be like, they shoehorn this surface music into things, and it gets further away from the inventiveness of what the original Cantina Band, where it's like, why didn't they do something like fun, like have like some crazy, newish type take on it or something. I mean, I don't really know how to articulate this other than to say I'm not a fan. It's like, if you're going to do crazy space music, why doesn't it expand? Why isn't it more of like why isn't there some kind of crazy Sun Ra thing going on?
Yeah.
And, you know what I mean? It could have been,
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Sun Ra. So I'm actually a huge Sun Ra fan, and so I listen to his music a lot. And I was thinking of that recently too. I was like, it's such a missed opportunity that they didn't get, Marshall Allen in there, who's the current leader of the orchestra. I guess he was a flute player for a while, but I don't think he's played the flute for a while. But he plays like alto sax, and then something called an electronic valve instrument, which is basically like just this crazy electronic thing that makes like bleeps and bloops, but he makes it sound good. But like, why didn't you just like bring him in to do like some crazy thing like that? Or, I don't know. I mean, it's J.J. Abrams, right? So, but like bringing Lin-Manuel Miranda to make some generic sounding reggae thing is just like, that is the safest possible choice they could have made. And
which, I mean, in some ways, for the safest possible Star Wars sequel ever made. You know what I mean?
Right,
it's kind of like, well,
it's J.J. Abrams, right? Like he's not a person in anything that he's done where he's gonna like take crazy risks about, creatively. But I mean, the Cantina Band, this idea of source music, it's called source music, which is, for those of you who don't know, so source music is music that's in a movie that the characters in the movie can also hear. So like the Cantina Band, right? Luke and Obi-Wan hear that band in addition to us. I mean, that's something that Lucas used a lot in American Graffiti and was kind of praised for his use of that in American Graffiti. So I think having that in A New Hope is consistent with what his stylistic preferences were at the time. And then it's just that when you get to Return the Jedi, like I thought that was fine too. It's like 50% like, all right, let's just do this thing we did in A New Hope again. And 50% of like, let's throw John Williams' kid a bone and have him write the song for us.
Right.
Like,
and then let's remove it 15 years later or whatever.
Right. Like, I never liked that. Crazy space disco. But, and I guess you could say, well, Benny Goodman big band jazz isn't necessarily the riskiest creative choice he could make either, and that's fair to some degree. I think having like crazy looking, big head aliens play it when the setting is dramatically different as it is, and then having that like familiar, this is something that like I'm kind of familiar with, but the setting is crazy, like that I think is unique enough, and certainly was unique at the time, and it just means that the bar would have to be pushed even higher and higher by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, and certainly by the time you get to The Force Awakens. I mean, I do like that idea, and I kind of hope that they keep using that kind of source music. It's just they need to make it more interesting than they did. And I should say that that Star Wars Oxygen podcast basically did like a whole episode about source music in I think it was one of their A New Hope episodes.
Okay, I was going to say it's been a while.
And they talked about George Lucas's use of source music in American Graffiti and all that. They talked about all that. So if you want to know more about that, listen to that episode. But it's...
Well, I mean...
Right, you could push it so much further and like expand what the music that exists in the Star Wars galaxy that the characters in this galaxy listen to. Like it's still pretty limited in terms of what we know they listen to in the movies. Like you could blow that out a lot and really make this galaxy kind of interesting and blow out that side and develop this kind of like, here's what the arts of this, galaxy are like. And they just haven't done that yet. Rebels has done that a little bit with the visual art in Thrawn's office, but
right.
In terms of music, like there's still a lot of ground that they could go over that they just haven't done.
Yeah, well, of course it's been tried. I mean, sorry, all of a sudden my I don't know if you heard that. All of a sudden my headphones just filled. I opened up a web page and my ears just got filled with a bunch of music, and I can't. I was going to refer to that Heir to the Jedi song that has kind of been notorious, where it's called something about Darth Vader's many parts, which isn't a song that you actually hear. It's just a song referred to of this kind of like folk song about the Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars, it's like that thing where they don't really. It's kind of like, I don't know if they really ever have been able to kind of cross the bridge. They've got this fantastic composer doing the music of the movie. But yeah, for source music, it almost seems like they're actually getting further away from what was interesting about the source music in Star Wars. And again, the Lin-Manuel, I keep wanting to say Manuel Noriega, but it's Miranda. Like I said, he's kind of like, I think in 20 years, people kind of, it's like, it would be like if George Lucas had all of a sudden had Rod McEwen do a song in A New Hope, and people 20 years later would be like, who's that guy? What's that all about?
Right.
It's kind of it was very much tied to the time. I mean, Hamilton was and is still huge, but, and that's why I'm always like not a big fan of tying anything specific to like, even down to casting. Like, you don't really want to have the hot young actor be the lead of your Star Wars movie, because it's distracting. And I feel that for music, it was the same way. But, in a long circuitous route, I would really hope that that Lord Miller do not resurrect jizz music, or even some kind of quasi faux Western Ennio Morricone type music for the Han Solo movie.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of hope they stick to, I don't know, every indication says that like, this isn't this isn't going to be what you think it is, kind of thing. So who knows where they're going to end up when it's all done. But they're still filming it, so they're far away from scoring,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess are we still kind of, we want to just move into the news stuff, or did you?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton of news this week. We're going to mostly talk about the latest episode of Rebels and maybe some comics. There's not a ton of news. To say that there's not a ton of news is to kind of bypass the stuff we've been hearing about characters in Rogue One who didn't die or who died a certain way in the movie and they died a different way in the first draft of the movie, or they died in the movie and they didn't die in the first draft of the movie. Like, we're getting a lot of that kind of stuff, and a lot of, oh, here's how, video wise, like, here's how ILM, made K2SO. And I feel like I'm kind of not that interested in, like, I'll read it just so I know, like, oh, okay, so that's what the first draft was like. But I don't feel a particular, like, hunger for that kind of information about Rogue One anymore. And the feeling I'm getting from taking all this in is that there just aren't maybe a lot of interesting stories to tell about Rogue One. Like, it went through a couple different drafts, as all movies do. The ending was too long, so they came up with a way to fix that. Great. ILM came up with a way to bring Peter Cushing back, sort of. Okay, well, we knew that because we saw the movie, and we could kind of guess how that happened. But, there's this Making of Rogue One book coming out in a couple months later this year. And just it's the fact that we're getting these stories now, and that we're getting these stories via some kind of, like, blog or interviews with Gary Whitta or, Entertainment Weekly is helping to promote the Blu-ray and digital release. And so it's, has this behind the scenes content. It's like, well, okay, this is how that kind of behind the scenes making of content is being distributed now. So what additional value is this book going to have? And I've talked about this before, so I don't want to, like, rehash too much of it. But, except for maybe some previously unseen concept art that may or may not be in the book, like, I don't get the sense that this book is going to be all that interesting to read unless you're someone who, like, wants all of these anecdotes in one place for a future reference.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm getting the sense that this book is going to be mostly kind of fluff and, like, oh, Rogue One was so great. Doesn't everybody love Rogue One? And, like, that's kind of not the biggest value these kinds of books can provide, for me, at least, anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as much as I love behind the scenes stuff, and it's, and as time goes on, I think about, like, the kind of Star Wars ephemera that I want in my actual collection, aside from toys. It's like the books are kind of, have always been a way that I've tried to, I really like the making of books. Even so, I've been pricing out those making of books for, I still want the hardcover versions, and I've got them on Kindle, but it doesn't feel the same. And I keep on, like, waiting for the prices to, get all three of them for a good deal. But it's like, yeah, this kind of stuff is when you're kind of, well, it's really strange because, like, say Rogue One comes out on digital, like, so if you're a digital copy type person, it's this Friday the 24th will be, you can get Rogue One. And it's really strange that it's in some ways they're promoting Rogue One again for video release by telling you all the things that they didn't do, which is fine, but right. There's not going to be at any point in the package of Rogue One in the extras that they're going to sit down and, like, the Rogue One you almost saw, or so, you know what I mean? Where they could have had, Kathy Kennedy and Gareth Edwards sitting down and going, like, oh, he had said part of the reason that there's not deleted scenes is because they didn't, a lot of these things were changed at the point where they didn't finish the special effects. They were, you don't want to spend money on something that's not going to get used. And I totally understand that. But, it would have been nice to have a little featurette, 10 minutes of, like, kind of addressing the idea why the trailer that we got so excited about was very different than the actual movie. Although I would totally argue that it was probably a better movie than what they had been working on, because basically every little thing from the ending that, Lyra Urso is going to be a Jedi, and it was going to start out with her being taken down by Krennic and his Death Troopers. And it's like that stuff never got past the early stage. I mean, that was Gary Whitta era, story ideas. So I don't think any of that was even filmed. And, later on, it's like there was an ending where the heroes actually all got frozen in carbonite and were floating in space, which in some ways is more terrifying than having them all die, And, I mean, that stuff is interesting, but it's when you kind of just throw it out willy-nilly like this, it does take away a bit of the punch. And maybe that's what they're trying to do. Maybe they're trying to sell the delete, instead of having people complain about the thing, maybe they're trying to be like, oh, these aren't things that you would want to have seen anyway. But
yeah,
because they're definitely not, these things are not coming out in an enticing way. Yeah.
Well, and that's a good point. I hadn't thought about what you were saying about, well, we're learning about the movie that didn't get made. And that is part of the story of movies that do get made. Hearing about, oh, that would have been a cool scene, but it was too long, or you learn more about the process of how it's made and how they kind of came to find the idea that you like and they like. But yeah, it's a weird way to promote the movie by saying well, here's what isn't in the movie. Now, please buy the movie.
Yeah, we're not going to refer to any of it in the ephemera. We're just
right.
Yeah, it's like
initially these people weren't going to die, but then they did. Please purchase this movie on Blu-ray. And watch these people die.
And buy the toys. They're now on markdown because nobody bought them. But because it's like, it was that kind of thing. Well, they did pay the price where I feel like, where it's like, yeah, you did kill off all your characters. And that's a hard sell to be like, go out and buy this toy of this figure that dies at the end of the movie so you can have further adventures. I'm like, oh, right. wait, there's not going to be any further adventures. No. I mean, I still give them credit for doing that, killing off all the characters, but yeah, it's kind of an odd, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know how people market home video now, because I don't think it's, the 90s
they throw everything in a wire bin in the middle of their store. And tell people they're anywhere from $5 to $8 each.
Exactly, it's that kind of it's the future of home video. It's not. But I mean, back in a while ago, in the heyday of DVD, it was that the whole idea of getting deleted scenes or alternate versions. Now, I'm not really thinking about any. Of course, there's the Blade Runner way where you five cuts. 4 cuts on one Blu-ray and the fifth cut on an extra Blu-ray, only available in the overpriced set that I wish I hadn't spent the money on, and I got rid of it. But they would what's that movie that came out? It was a Paul Walker movie called Joyride, and it was it's like a thriller with Steve Zahn and I forget. But anyway, that was one of those movies that, ironically, when you got the DVD, it didn't do that well in theaters. But it was one of the examples that you could literally watch versions of how they'd come to the movie. Here was one version that we tried and didn't work. Here's another version. And I found that fascinating. And then eventually there was things like, what is that Angelina Jolie movie Salt, where it's a kind of an espionage movie. They sold that movie of a thing you could watch 3 different endings, and which were totally one turns out that she wasn't a spy, one turns out she is a spy. It's that kind of I mean, it even got weird to the point where they were releasing weird extended versions on DVD. There was a they call it the I'm actually looking at this, so it's embarrassing to admit I own this, but I actually hunted it down because I was curious. It's the the unrated extended edition of Con Air. Yeah. Which is a movie you don't need an unrated extended version of it.
Right.
And I've watched it, and I can say that with absolute certainty that this was a DVD that didn't need to be released, because there's nothing in that extended version that improves the movie that is Con Air. But I was curious. But it's really moved away from that, and it's the idea that there's 4 different versions of Rogue One being released on video on April 4th. It's there's a 4-disc one. with special features only available at Target. Now then there's a Steelbook only available at Best Buy. And that's kind of where they're at now, where there's never like a complete edition. Well, except when they release it, months and months later, where like the sucker that I am when I bought the collector's edition of The Force Awakens, which I still haven't even watched. I haven't listened to the commentary or anything. So I actually question whether I needed this at all. But yeah, it's just kind of a funny way of like, I mean, I guess maybe they're struggling as much as anyone else of how to market movies when people don't. It's not like, like they tried to like get people, like when DVDs came out, it was almost like, oh, DVDs is what's going to take over our flagging, our sad recorded music industry where people aren't buying CDs anymore. But really the lifespan
that worked for maybe a year.
Yeah.
And then streaming took over.
And I worked in a record store during that era, so I actually saw the flip where people would become less and less interested in a new album coming out and be more like, hey, do you guys have because we sold DVDs, like, do you guys have this DVD, because we heard that like this version's coming out and it's got all these extras. And now it's just like, I think most people, they buy the thing and they redeem the digital copy and the disc becomes ancillary to the whole concern. So I can kind of understand why they have to try different ways to entice people. It just seems very strange that they're enticing them with what they don't have.
Yeah.
But whatever, that's they're so probably ready to be starting to promote their next episode 8 that they're probably not even, that this is almost like, well, we got to do something, which is kind of sad,
I mean, and not even just episode 8, because another piece of this behind the scenes promotion stuff is, I mean, we're getting this stuff as they're making the movie too. So the Han Solo movie, we've talked the last couple of weeks about Fuerteventura and the fact that they were filming there, and okay, now we think maybe it might be Corellia. And so the local news in the Canary Islands did a brief report on the fact that they were filming the movie there, including some footage of the area where they were filming or likely to film. But like, that's online now, right? So we could see like, okay, well, this is the location, and we'll get to see like what it looks like without the set built there. And then in the movie, we'll get to see what it looks like with the set dressing. And so, we're getting all this stuff ahead of time, as it's happening, right after it happens, as it gets released on video, right? We're getting this stuff constantly now. And so the value of having these books later on, it's like, well, the value add, I guess, again, is just having all of this information in one place. But I mean, so we've been describing Fuerteventura and the Canary Islands and kind of what they look like. Did you watch the video? I assume.
I did.
What do you think of the location?
Well, I think we mentioned this last week, but God, well, is everybody like born on a sandy planet? Does everybody grow up on a sand planet?
Right.
But I mean, it looks nice. I mean, I'll be interested. Again, I think I said this last week that they might be adding buildings and stuff later on, and they're just kind of doing their exteriors. But it's cool. It's like, I guess when you have made this commitment to, real sets, practical effects, which I'm not knocking them. There is that kind of idea where it's like, well, there's only so many different, the Maldives was very, is a jungle without being like what we would necessarily think of like jungle, like kind of like I think most of us, when we think jungle, we think of like an Amazonian kind of like dense foliage and that kind of stuff. And then it's like, well, no, there's only so many variations though that it can show. It's like they can't, I guess they already did the snow planet again. It's like, well, how many different, you could come out to the Pacific Northwest and that's the Ewoks, and it's like, I don't know. It feels like sometimes that they might have to kind of go back to CGI because they are kind of running out of, flora and fauna on this planet that can pass for being kind of cool and exciting. It's like, yeah, it's, I was thinking about every time I see episode 3 when they do the Order 66, how kind of exotic some of these planets were that they only show briefly.
Mm-hmm.
But, like huge planets with mushrooms and stuff growing out of the stuff.
Exotic looking flowers.
Yeah.
And, Cato Nemoidia, which is, basically mountains with like cities built on hammocks that run between the mountains or whatever, It
kind of makes me wonder if we're maybe missing out on some of that the expansive elements of sci-fi. It's, The Force Awakens made everything, in some small way, it almost made Star Wars feel small again. Even in Rebels, they don't, lately I don't feel like they've been exploiting the idea that they can kind of do whatever they want. They're kind of sticking to very kind of, original trilogy. And again, maybe that's an aesthetic choice because they do want to be tied in at the end to the original trilogy. But it's that kind of like, even like Jeddah was kind of like, felt like a kind of like an updated version of Mos Eisley. But then the rings of, I forget the name of the planet that's one of the first where Cassian shoots that guy. I mean, that was kind of, I felt like that was a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Of kind of stuff. And again, I don't want to knock it because, I mean, I thought the planet that the Ursos were on, I think that, that was Iceland. And I think that was really, really cool. I mean, it was kind of like their way of, having the Lars homestead, but in a kind of more of a volcanic area.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not knocking. It's just that kind of thing where it's like, I kind of wish the universe felt a little bit bigger, like aesthetically. I mean, I liked the Coruscant stuff from the prequels, although I always felt like that they probably could have rendered the detail a little bit better. They could have integrated the actors in it a little bit. It did look a little, you could kind of tell they were all standing on blue garbage bags.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's the uncanny valley again. It's like, well, we can't do that and make it look. We still can't make that look good, Because I mean, I've seen other movies like the Wachowskis did that with Jupiter Ascending, and there was these huge, expansive sci-fi planets, and it still looked like people walking on blue garbage bags being inserted into it. So maybe it's not. Maybe we're not there yet. I don't know. Maybe that's
I mean, it's funny. You and I basically came to the same thoughts, but independently. I mean, we hadn't talked about this, but I was thinking the same thing. Is that we didn't really see them that much, and maybe they didn't look the best, but I do also miss that kind of inventiveness, that visual inventiveness from the prequels in terms of what the planets look like. I mean, Utapau being that kind of sinkhole planet, that had kind of a neat look to it, I thought. And in Rogue One, I mean, some of my favorite visual things were seeing those planets, the establishing shots of the planets where it's like, oh, that looks neat, and this is going to be something we haven't seen before. Oh, it's a rock. There's just rocks everywhere, and they're just driving around in rocks in a tank, right? Like I kind of want to see more pizzazz. I want a little more of that sci-fi. Like, don't just take a beach and then add a tower to it, or like put a little people mover on it. Like, give me something a little more than that. Otherwise it just looks like a beach. So yeah, but at the same time, you're right. It's like, well, how good is that going to look? And I'm certain that the technology has improved since the prequels, but looking better than the prequels doesn't necessarily mean looking good, So I kind of am longing for more of that visual inventiveness in the planets and the locations and kind of what they look like. And that is going to mean that, they have to they have to do less of this, real sets and have to do a little more work in building the environment from scratch. But you don't maybe do that all the time, and you don't do only that, but I think there are still ways to do that to expand the look of these newer Star Wars films instead of just like Iceland, but with a moisture evaporator in it, or the Maldives, but with the front end of a bunker built on it, or things like that. Fuerteventura, but different. Dubrovnik, but with Star Wars doors painted on the things, right? Like I'm to the point now where like I want a little more than that. You got to give me a little more visual inventiveness than that. And I know they can do it from like a creative standpoint. I mean, the concept art for all these movies is great. I guess the question is, how good will it look on film? And well, I personally, but will audiences more generally be okay with, maybe this, maybe you can tell that they had to like animate the people's feet because the floor looked weird,
right,
or something, or maybe we have to put a lot of light everywhere to cover up the seams of this thing. But I think maybe they're getting to the point where there's a little more value to generating these environments that aren't just Dubrovnik, but with different doors on the buildings.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it makes me think about, looking at some of the original artwork, the Ralph McQuarrie, and I should say this because it's like this is probably the best place as any to confess my expenditure, is that they had a deal. I saw this on a website. They had a deal on that McQuarrie 2-volume hardcover thing. Have you seen that one where it's a huge coffee table book with every sketch? It's supposed to be every sketch he did. It came out over Christmas. It's quite expensive.
Right, and it's like $180 or something.
Well, it got down to $135.
Oh, okay.
So I finally I had some birthday money, and I was like, so I ordered. I haven't gotten it yet. It's supposed to come here on Thursday, but it's like I was like kind of like, oh, do I really want to do this? And then I'm like, if it goes out of print, I'm going to be so mad, because I've so many times in the last 2 years, things have come out, music and stuff like, oh, it's only so many copies. And I'm like, I hem and haw, and while I'm hemming and hawing, it goes out of print. So I'm like, I'm just going to do it. But that's my point. When you go back to the source, which, and I've complained in other episodes that maybe they're like, say, Rebels, they spend too much time, or even JJ spent too much time kind of cherry picking the McQuarrie stuff to try to, gin up the no pun intended, the Star Wars and the Star Warsiness. The Star
Warsiness.
Yes, thank you. Of Star Wars, by letting something that had been done 40 plus years ago do the work for them. And again, but when you look at his, that kind of stuff, when I was a kid and I'd see those pictures, it was so even the ones that didn't actually, he didn't do them. I'm not talking about matte paintings but it would inspire this kind of like, wow, what is all this? What is that? Where's that planet? And I feel like, the future is now. Shouldn't they be able to do that? Shouldn't they be able to make it look huge and expansive? And it just feels like at the end of the day that, like, maybe the CGI, there's no way of not having it make everything look fake. It's that kind of, again, maybe that's why they're doing it. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was hoping that, 40 years on, that movies would look more like, it would be less based on trickery, that kind of, like they could, with CGI, they could do all these things, but in some ways I feel like maybe they've never been able to get out of that quote uncanny valley or whatever, which now that I know what that means, I'm going to be using that term all the time.
Yeah. But, I've talked about this book before. John Knoll has a book. It's called like 360 something, or 365 days. It's basically, it's photos he's taken of or photos he's either collected from the archives or took himself of basically every possible set and location environment that they ever filmed for all of, at that point, the first 6 Star Wars movies. and him talking a little bit about like how they did it or what the idea behind the design was or things like that. And it's really interesting actually to get to see like how those things were put together, because I guess that is maybe one, to circle back to our earlier description, like maybe one of the deficiencies of those making of books. You know, we get to see, okay, yeah, we know there was a lot of kit bashing, and we got to see how they filmed the Death Star trench run for, you know, New Hope, and how they did the models for The Empire Strikes Back, the Battle of Hoth. You know, we've seen a lot of that, but a lot of other of those kind of set building things don't get as much play. And so this is kind of a nice way to see that. But yeah, him talking about all of those environments and those planets from the prequels was like really interesting, and helped me appreciate them a little more as someone who didn't think they looked very good. I could at least say like, okay, well, the idea behind it's really good and interesting. It's a shame that it just didn't turn out well in terms of how it looked on the screen, or that it didn't get more time. I mean, like, I keep mentioning that Cato Nemoidia thing. Like, I think that's a really interesting kind of science fiction-y idea. And, you know, you just never saw that's, you know, there's this whole backstory to this planet and this society that you never really see in the movie. You see these Nemoidians, you have no idea where they come from, and then you briefly see their planet at the end, but you're not told, I don't think, that that's Cato Nemoidia, and you don't have a sense of like, oh, okay, there are these hammock things, and that's where their cities are, and all that, right? So, yeah, so that book is really interesting, and yeah, again, just. And I'm starting to need. I'm sure you can go back and find some previous episode where I talked about how bad the digital environments looked and how, you know, the real sets had practical effects was a good way for them to go. But I mean, we're not even 2 movies in. Technically, you know, they've released 2 movies out of at least 5, and I'm sure more. And I'm already thinking like, all right, we gotta make this visual, and we got to push the boundaries a little more visually here, which I mean, maybe that says more about me than them, but I'm already at that point where it's like, all right, 2 movies that kind of looked similar in how they made these sets and these environments. Let's maybe try a different direction and see what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe it has something to do with, this underlying need, which I understand there's probably great pressure from fans, or, you know, whoever they're thinking that they need to please when they make these movies, that, you know, from the Star Wars to Jedi documentary, which I think is, gosh, it was on VHS. I'm sure it's on YouTube. Anyway, there's this interview with George Lucas circa 84, 85 or something like that, or maybe it's around the time. Maybe it is around the time of Jedi. And he kind of famously said that, you know, it's all great with special effects, but without a story, it doesn't really matter. And it basically was pushing this theory of like, you know, why don't we luxuriate over some of the images and some of these exotic worlds as much as we should in these movies? And I think his defense of not doing that was the fact that, you know, we're telling a story, and it was, obviously it was partly a concession to technology. You couldn't have, they couldn't have a lot of these kind of camera movements or kind of stuff, even until the special edition, where they would kind of, you know, do these shots where you'd show, Cloud City and following a cloud car. And I think maybe in some ways, you know, he overcompensated in the prequels. And I think maybe Disney or Lucasfilm or whoever, maybe they're thinking, well, you know, maybe that's the recipe we want to go for. We only want to hint at these things. We don't want to expand. We want to keep everything small. I mean, if you really think about the original trilogy, you know, before they made any changes, it's like not a lot of planets. There's, you know, everything is, you know, in the margins, because, well, they were a ragtag fugitive fleet, to quote Battlestar Galactica. But, you know, it was the idea that they were in the margins. They were in trouble. They couldn't go to major population centers because that's where the bad guys hung out. And so it kind of fed into it. But now that, like I said, it's now that they're not like that, they can show these expansive worlds. But again, I think I might just be repeating your point that I feel like, if they just kind of go, oh, we're going to do desert, we're going to do sand, we're going to do snow, we're going to do jungle, it's going to start to feel a little bit like repetitious. And I hope that this idea that, it's like, like that Laura Dern and Oscar Isaac had kind of remarked, it's like, this is such an indie movie, it's almost like we're getting away with something. I'm hopefully that doesn't actually extend to the sets and to the settings.
Yeah.
If that's the way the acting is done and the interpersonal thing, and there's not, they don't have a 15-minute droid factory sequence that's shoehorned in the 11th hour to make the thing, that's fine. Those are the mistakes of the prequels, but I wouldn't take the expansiveness of the universe as a mistake. And I hope that they get back to that in future episodes. And again, so far they haven't shown that that's where they want to go, but I would caution them. And I'm sure they're listening. I'm sure they're listening. And they're going to want to change production of a movie that's already being scored to satisfy my needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that kind of sums up the news of the week, really.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing that probably happened over the last week was the Star Wars Rebels episode, Twin Suns.
Yes, they've been gearing up for this one for, it feels like ever since was it last summer that they
probably
where they let out this, was it at Celebration where they showed that Obi-Wan, or no, that was Thrawn. They introduced Thrawn thing. It was the mid-season break around Christmas.
Yeah, but they've certainly been promoting this episode for a while. They've kind of been hinting at it, and then you saw a clip of it a while back, and so anticipation has been building. This is of course the episode with the Maul Obi-Wan Kenobi showdown. Just to go over the episode, hopefully briefly. The episode opens with Maul wandering around. So the first episode of the season, not even the half season, but the season, so months ago, right, Maul and Ezra joined the Jedi and the Sith holocrons. They gained some kind of vision of twin suns. Ezra didn't really know what it means. Maul knew exactly what it meant, or at least the location. Of course, that is Tatooine, even though we've seen multiple planets with several different suns now. At least in books and comics and other media, not necessarily the movies, but so Maul goes to Tatooine. He's wandering the desert, right? He knows Obi-Wan's on Tatooine. He doesn't necessarily know where on this planet because it's a planet. So he's kind of wandering the desert trying to find Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he kind of realizes that he needs to draw Kenobi out, and in using a fragment of the holocron that he kept with him. So from there, that's kind of that's the cold open. That's the Star Wars Rebels intro sequence. So then we shift to the Phoenix Squadron base. Everyone's asleep except Ezra hears that message that Obi-Wan Kenobi sent to the Jedi Order after Order 66 to avoid the temple. It's kind of fragmented and breaking up, but he hears it. He goes to, I guess, Kanan's room, where or whoever has the broken pieces of the holocron which are broadcasting these things. He then hears Maul through the Sith holocron, yelling about Kenobi. He thinks Obi-Wan Kenobi is in danger, wants to go find him. He tells the rest of the crew. Rex is like, well, Bail Organa told me he was dead, so he's dead. Hera says, no, you're needed here. We're planning this attack on Lothal. Your place is here. You're the one who knows Lothal better than anyone. You need to help us. But he leaves anyway. He steals a training X-Wing. Chopper comes along without Ezra's knowledge, but Chopper ends up there. So they go to Tatooine. They end up getting attacked by Tusken Raiders who... he sees the little piece of the holocron. Then they're attacked by the Tuskens. Tusken Raiders destroy the A-Wing, but Ezra and Chopper get away, and then unbeknownst to Ezra, Maul shows up and kills the Tusken Raiders. So now Ezra and Chopper are wandering through the desert. Sandstorm kicks up. All of the sand, gets in Chopper's gears, his motivators, whatever. He craps out. Ezra starts hallucinating, and so he kind of passes out in the desert. Obi-Wan comes up and finds them. I guess he fixes Chopper because Ezra wakes up and Chopper is fine. And Obi-Wan counsels Ezra that, look, you have your place in the universe. You've kind of ruined things by coming here. Or not ruined things, but you've changed the timeline. You have altered events by coming here. Your place is with the Ghost Crew. Yeah, your ship is destroyed. Take this dewback, ride it out of the desert, and that'll be your way home. So then he leaves. Ezra leaves. Maul shows up, having followed Ezra. And then you get, as George Lucas would write it in the script, they fight. And if you think that's like, that is exactly what he said he would put in like the episode 1 script. He would just say, there's a lot of cheating. He showed the script. He's like, oh, it's done. It's like, well, there's a lot of cheating in there. There's a lot of they fight, things like that. So, and that basically describes the rest of the episode. It's not even the entire third act. It's just the last half of the third act, I guess.
Yeah.
They fight it from the time Maul takes his first lunge, his first move in the duel, until Obi-Wan strikes the fatal blow is 3 seconds of screen time. So, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But so Obi-Wan pretty easily defeats Maul. Maul, as he's dying, is starting to piece things together in his brain. He's like, oh, you're not here. You're here for a reason. You're here protecting something. No, you're here protecting someone. Is it the Chosen One? And Obi-Wan kind of nods. And then Maul says, he will avenge us. Then you see Ezra flying Maul's ship back to the Phoenix Squadron base. And he's like, oh, my family is here. My place is here. And then every single member of the Ghost Crew just puts one hand on Ezra. And then that's the end of that scene. And then the episode ends with Obi-Wan riding the dewback up towards the Lars homestead. He hears Beru Lars calling out to Luke, sort of like in the beginning of A New Hope, where she's like, Luke, Luke. And then you see Luke running towards that main building as the Force theme plays. And then the Force theme plays pretty much exactly, maybe not exactly, but really, really close to how you hear it in A New Hope. And then it plays over the end credits. So that is the episode. I have some notes in here about specific things, but why don't we just start off, Robert? What did you think of this episode?
Well, I thought it was simultaneously very well done and a big missed opportunity. I feel like they built up to this for months, and for how they did it, I felt like we didn't gain a lot. I mean, I was trying to think of like a really good, really slick way to get into this, but I'll just come right out and say it. I feel like it absolutely it should have been just a standalone episode with no Ezra, no Chopper, none of that, none of the actual Ghost Crew. I think it should have just been 20 minutes, 22 minutes of Maul, Obi-Wan and Tatooine. And it kind of, I felt like at the end of the day, it was a very strange way to kind of, say goodbye, I guess is the thing, to a character who, he's a villain and whatnot. But one of the great things that Dave Filoni and company had kind of been able to do over the Clone Wars and Rebels is to kind of, for lack of a better term, humanize Maul, make him an infinitely more complex character than he was in The Phantom Menace. I mean, he was essentially a boogeyman who came to a very abrupt, end, and very final in a lot of ways, final demise at the end, getting, cut in half. And of course there was kind of the idea of well, this is comic book, this is fantasy. We can, we don't have to we can resurrect him because through his sheer hatred. And I mean, like, again, Sam Witwer's voice acting, it was a very different take on the character. It expanded through a lot of different threads of he became a real character, which is something that even George Lucas was unable to do. With his he doesn't actually control the ancillary material, but, comic books and short novels and whatnot. I never felt that they were able to depict Maul as anything other than a single-minded animal bent on nothing but carnage. And Filoni and the Rebels and Clone War crew, they were able to humanize in the way that they kind of ended him I just felt it was almost kind of a betrayal of betrayal is a strong word, but it was a misuse of all the great capital that they had built over the years. And like, I'm not even knocking the 3-second thing, because I guess that is an allusion to a genre of film. It was just I expected a lot more exposition and just closure in a good way, because it's like I'm gonna let you talk a little bit, because I have a lot of things to say about this, and I'm gonna stop and let you talk about it for a bit.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you somewhat in that, I mean, Ezra is almost completely superfluous in this episode. So if you haven't watched the Rebels Recon, kind of, here's behind the scenes, let's talk to the Dave Filoni and the producers of this episode about it. One of the things he talks about is, he doesn't put it in these terms, and I don't necessarily think he would think of it in exactly these terms, but Dave Filoni is basically cleaning up his own mess here, right? He was like, look, this episode, basically we had to do this episode. We knew that we would have to do this at some point when, we're the ones, meaning really Clone Wars, right? Dave Filoni and George Lucas are the ones who decided to bring Maul back from the dead, right? After episode 1, they're the one who brought him back in the Clone Wars. And so, you can't just keep that guy around forever. I mean, I've been on record as saying, like, I thought they kept him around way longer than they should have.
Right.
I'm not even sure they should have brought him back at all, but that's what Lucas wanted to do, whatever. But he also said that Maul was originally supposed to die in the season 2 finale, right? When they go to, is it Malastare? Do I have that right? Right, where Vader fights
Ahsoka,
that planet, right? That initially, because Maul was there, right? Maul kind of not lured, but Ezra and Kanan and Ahsoka kind of followed Maul there, or that's where they found Maul. He lived there, or he had been there and they found him there. Whatever it was. So he was originally supposed to fight Vader and be defeated by Vader in that season 2 finale, but they said they changed it because there wasn't really a lot of emotional weight and emotional drama to that duel. Right, Anakin Skywalker and Maul don't really have much personal history. I mean, they have some personal history, I guess, from whatever they did in the Clone Wars TV show, but certainly not. And, there's like the emotional drama of, like, I guess Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader eventually became Maul's replacement as the Emperor's number 2. So, like, in this episode, when Maul says, he'll avenge us, that's kind of what he's talking about. Like, he's talking about he has this grudge against the Emperor and, to a slightly lesser extent, Darth Vader. But, Filoni was saying that if they had Vader kill him at the end of season 2, that would have been more of like a fan fiction-y kind of thing. And they try to avoid those sorts of things. So having him fight Obi-Wan has more of an emotional weight and drama to it, because they fought in Phantom Menace, and not only that, Maul killed Obi-Wan's mentor in the Phantom Menace, right? So you get more of that emotional weight to this showdown. And then having Ezra there, they're like, well, at least in the context of Rebels, Ezra is the one who kind of started listening to Maul, kind of got the Ghost Crew to go along with what Maul was doing for a little while. It's kind of Ezra's fault that they're all tied up in Maul's business. So he should be the one to be involved in ending it. And I get that logic. I do. From a storytelling perspective, that makes sense. But you're right. As the episode played out, I was like, what? So what is Ezra going to do here? Like, what is he? He's just following Maul. He was there to be used as bait. But it didn't. I mean, Maul could have used practically anything as bait. I mean, to have the comics tell it, Obi-Wan is like all over the place saving people on Tatooine, not just Luke Skywalker. He's like Mr. Behind the scenes superhero, vigilante, whatever. So he could have used anything really to
could have
try
used
to bait
a certain blonde-haired child that he's tasked to protect.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Maul knew about Luke, right? Because he didn't seem to figure out why Obi-Wan was there until he was dying, essentially. But he could have played on Obi-Wan's kind of do-gooderness to some degree. So
yeah, I mean, it could have been Jawas. It could have been the Tusken Raiders.
People, it could have been it could have been farmers. Could have been anyone. So yeah, I mean, it seems superfluous. I mean, and if that's the case, if you're going to say, okay, well, this was coming. I mean, I don't know why I get why they had this episode now, because you're building a momentum towards the series finale. You want to make sure people are watching the show. You want to put it in like a good slot. But I also feel like maybe this could have been part of the season premiere, or the second episode of the season. And I guess the thing there is that if you do that, then there's not as strong of a pull for Ezra to stay with the Ghost, right? The Hera doesn't have as good of an argument for why he shouldn't go to Tatooine, right? And if you do it now, okay, we're clearly leading up to this attack on Lothal. He knows Lothal, right? Her reasoning makes complete sense there, and they weren't planning the attack on Lothal earlier in the season, and so she wouldn't have had that pull. But the other piece of what came out of Rebels Recon for me is that Filoni also said that this episode had the most deleted scenes and cut material probably of any other episode, and maybe even the Clone Wars if you don't count the episodes that didn't get made. But right, he was like, oh, this is probably the most material cut out that we ever did. Like they had. And they showed like concept art for all kinds of things. Like they were going to go to Mos Eisley at one point, and all of this other, Kanan was going to come with him or something.
Can I jump in 1 second? What is it with Star Wars now showing they're educating you on all the things you're not getting?
Yeah. Right.
Why?
Right.
When does this become
with the? Yeah.
Like, we have all this. We went to Mos Eisley. We're going here. They all got frozen in carbonite. Leela Erso is a Jedi. But we're not giving you any of that, because that would have been wrong. And it's just like, it's really a strange way to kind of, I'm not saying that they should hide this stuff from us, but it's funny how they kind of, like, the things that they didn't do are somehow supposed to make you be happier with what they did.
Well, I mean, I think in this instance, Filoni he may have been asked a question about this or something, about how, it's a very kind of simple episode, right? There's no like B plot going on. The episode is very quiet in many places. It ends on kind of a quiet note. Right, there's not a whole lot of stuff going on in this episode, right? Story-wise, it's relatively straightforward. And so I think he was saying, like, well, yeah, I mean, it used to be a lot more complicated than it was. And then we realized, like, no, this is the core story. We simplified everything. I mean, I kind of would be interested to see what it looked like, or what maybe I would be interested in seeing what some of the initial scripts were like, to see all of this other story that was in there, just to kind of see how it would play. Because, I mean, it's this episode was almost too simple, right? And I can talk about the brief duel in a minute, and the allusions to kind of samurai movies and all that. But, other than that, I mean, the only thing that really gets your blood pumping in this episode is when the Tusken Raiders attack Ezra and Chopper, right? And it's neat. It's a neat moment, and you're like, oh, something's happening. And then it goes back to like nothing happening and just people walking around the desert.
Yeah.
And on one hand, the show does a good job of conveying like, hey, planet is just like a vast desert of empty nothingness that you can walk for days and days and not see anything. Like, they did a very good job conveying that environment, but that doesn't make for the most interesting 21-minute show. So maybe it would have been, maybe it was a little overcomplicated, but if they had gone to Mos Eisley, hey, things would have happened in the episode. So I think that's kind of what he was getting at when he was talking about that. But yeah, you're right. It is a weird, I mean, we both say we love the behind the scenes stuff and the making of books, and that a lot of that stuff does include like, well, here's what the initial drafts were, and it was Anakin Scar Killer and all of that kind of stuff. And that's kind of interesting to know, but you're right. I don't think that should be like the first thing out of people's mouths, or like how they promote an episode or a movie of like, oh, well, you'll never guess what this movie wasn't. Yeah. The art, the backgrounds of Tatooine looked good. It's very stark and empty and dry. It looked very dry. So is there anything more you want to say about that before I talk about
it's just the idea that again, I'm going to push this theory that really it should have been a standalone episode in this.
No, I think I agree. If they had taken out Ezra completely, I think that would have.
Well, I mean, having Ezra show up, it's that idea where it completely ruins the idea that this kind of that surprise that Obi-Wan was like, oh, like when Alec Guinness actually kind of realizes what's going on when R2-D2 plays the hologram. He gets or the name Obi-Wan comes, because they're very smart that they just use the term Master Kenobi. They never use Obi-Wan and they never use Ben. It's that thing where they don't have to go, oh, that's a name I've not been heard in a long time, but it kind of deflects the idea that he was sitting out there in the desert thinking to himself, I might just die out here and I'm going to, it's like they emphasize that he's a more circumspect kind of fellow that we've seen, say, in, the end of Revenge of the Sith. But it's like they betray it by bringing where all of a sudden now he knows there's a rebellion, which I know they've never really established whether Obi-Wan actually travels off the planet from time to time, whether he actually had other adventures. I mean, there's still kind of these idea that Ewan McGregor might come back and play him again. So, but it's this idea where they introduce, not terribly, maybe 5 years before A New Hope, 5 years or 6 years before.
No, not even, because I think, what's his name? Paulo Hidalgo said that, he said the character, he didn't want to spoil things, but he said that character running at the end of the episode is like 16 or 17 maybe.
Oh,
so
really?
It's only a couple years apparently.
And so it's like the idea that like his immediate reaction to Ezra is to be like, no, I'm going to stay here and watch over this person I'm not going to refer to. Where he's like saying, why wouldn't he think like, well, maybe maybe this is more important than one person, or he would give him some advice, again, I don't really think that they should have ever interacted. It creates this problem that now Obi-Wan explicitly understands that there is an open rebellion going on in the galaxy that he might actually be assisting, and that, there's other Jedi out there. And when there's other Jedi, there's a guy out there with named Darth Vader who's looking into killing all these. I mean, it created more problems than it solved. What I would have, that isn't even that isn't even the attractive part of the story. To me, it's like, no, this is like 18 years of, well, now if you're 20, whatever, it's 25, 30 years of bad blood in the fact that, you know, Obi-Wan was essentially a teenager when he defeated Maul. And if you go into all the ancillary material, you know, Maul, he resurrected, he came back, he murdered the closest thing that Obi-Wan ever had to having a love affair with what's her name? The Mandalorian. Satine, like murdered her in cold blood to elicit this thing. It was the, you know, kind of closing the door on Obi-Wan's, probably in the back of his head thinking like, you know, well, I could leave the order. So it's like these guys, it's almost been like decades of like maybe, you know, Maul has not been, you know, Obi-Wan's greatest foe, because that would be an Anakin, but to Maul, Obi-Wan at least became the locus of all of his anger. And I just think it was like, you know, again, we'll talk about the battle in a minute here, but it's just the idea, like, I don't know, maybe this is me trying to put my ideas of storytelling, and obviously we all know I'm an extremely successful storyteller, you know, so it's just some guy with a podcast telling you how to do Star Wars. But I don't know, I just felt like they really missed an opportunity of everything to, like, I don't know, maybe, you know, the true, we want to see this true power of Kenobi, the guy who's been meditating in the desert for 20 years. Wouldn't it have been interesting if he had just kind of like talked Maul out of his anger, and like he just goes, you know something, screw this, and he throws a lightsaber in a hole and leaves. You know what I mean? It's like this build up, it's like this thing, and really it's like, I don't know, on some level, because it's even a kid's show, so that you gotta have you know, it's not like a G.I. Joe where they do, like, you know, knowing is half the battle at the end, but, you know, this moral idea that, like, you know, the I don't know, the greatest victory or something is the fight that's not actually fought, and you just kind of like, you know, why am I chasing this? Why did I do this? I mean, maybe the greatest way of finishing the story of Maul is the fact that he was the first redemption in a strange way, where it's like we're starting to realize that, like, you know, Obi-Wan is he's not a warrior anymore. It's like, you know, violence is a last resort, which, I mean, he had intimated in his thing, like, I had never planned on fighting Maul, you know, that, but it seems like I'm not going to be able to get away with that. But it's this idea that, like, that, you know, maybe violence wasn't always the solution. Maybe that, yes, Maul did some really crappy things, and he was ready to, you know, send Kanan out an airlock and earlier in the season. So, I mean, every indicator is that he hasn't learned his lesson. He's still fed by hatred. But it's like, almost like that's the, you know, Vader got redeemed, but he was dying. And it would have been interesting to see, like, okay, well, you know, there's a certain kind, it was like a mental battle where he realizes that, like, you know, he could have said, like, oh, you know, for decades we've been entrenched in this thing, and then you ever questioned why? And then he says, like, you know, you're right. But that's my take. That's one of the ways they could have done. But again, the battle wasn't horrible, and I'll leave you to talk about that.
Yeah, so there are a couple issues going on with the ending that have come up. The first is the swiftness of the duel, which I guess they kind of nipped in the bud pretty quickly with that Rebels Recon explaining that, look, this is, you know, if you watch any samurai movies, the samurai who are good, like, it just takes them one, maybe two moves and they kill someone, right? So, and especially when you consider where each of these characters are at this point in their lives, like, Maul is pretty rusty, right? Like, he's not the Maul that we saw in episode 1. He, you know, so the fact that he kind of leaves himself open, and is dispatched within 3 seconds is not necessarily out of character. They also mentioned it, and I hadn't noticed this when I watched the episode, but that, or someone mentioned this, maybe it was them. Yeah, Maul basically tries to do the same move that led to him killing Qui-Gon, like, where he takes the thing and tries to, like, hit him in the face with it and then slice it. Like, he tries to do that to Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan just counters it and just slices him up the middle. I also think it's interesting they didn't mention this. but right, Maul gets chopped in half horizontally in episode 1, The Phantom Menace. That's how he quote unquote dies there. And then in this episode, to finish him off, he gets essentially cut in half vertically. I don't know that was intentional, but it's because Obi-Wan's move there, it's very much a samurai move, and so that's not unusual that they would do it that way. But it is kind of interesting that he gets it kind of crosswise there. And yeah, it's the thing is that kind of reads also as maybe like a backhanded complaint or remark about the lightsaber fighting in the prequels, that like, well, if these people were any good, they wouldn't need all of the like flipping around, twisting the lightsaber behind their head, the crazy 10-minute long lightsaber duels, right? It would just take a couple of moves. And Nick, what's his name? The stunt coordinator, the guy who
Nick Gillard.
Yeah, the guy who quote unquote wrote the lightsaber duels, right? He, in one of those making of videos for episode 1, he said he basically wrote those lightsaber duels, and you could analogize it to a chess match, right? Where he was like, every move is a check, where there's only one possible thing that each character could do, right? There's only one move that Maul could do to attack, and there's only one move that, say, Qui-Gon could do to defend, and then from that position, each of them also has only one logical move that they could go to, and it's just that they keep stymieing each other. And that, like, you hear that and you go, okay, that makes sense. And then you hear Filoni talk about it as like, well, if they're any good, it shouldn't take them that long. And you're like, oh yeah, that's also true. And maybe it's just different traditions that they're calling upon, so, in different martial arts and different philosophies about how you choreograph those fights. That's probably more of it. But when you hear Filoni say that, you're like, yeah, I guess they didn't really need all that like crazy flipping around,
Yeah, but
God, contortions in their lightsaber duels that lasted like 10 minutes.
I mean, episode 1 would have been completely irredeemable without that kind of.
That's true too.
That's the thing. 20 years or 18 years or whatever. It's like I still like that's the best part of the movie, and I honestly can't sit there and go, this movie is completely without merit because it's got some great sword fighting in it. And like, I don't know sword fighting. And the funny thing is that I don't really know samurai movies, and I'm not like being like proud of that. It's just, it's a genre I've never been able to take the time to really watch, the Seven Samurai or whatever in really carefully. So it's like, that's great that they're referring to like, well, in samurai movies, they can do it in 3 moves or something. Like, well, something, Star Wars isn't really a samurai movie. It definitely, it
draws on some of those traditions, but that it's not exactly as.
Yeah, it's like kind of like that idea. Like I don't have a problem with the battle, the fight. I actually think it was kind of an interesting choice. But saying like, well, that's the way samurai movies are, and it's like, well, okay, that's fine, but you're not making a samurai movie. You're
right.
You're dipping into that, you're dipping into westerns, your samurai movies, your action movies. It's like interpersonal dramas of the 70s or whatever. It's like, well, okay, you can use those, but don't use that as an excuse if somebody criticizes it. So like, at least go like, well, something, we thought he was that good, and we wanted to show that Maul and him were on a completely different level. He was, Obi-Wan's almost on a spiritual level at this point. So he's his body is like, he knows how to fight. So it happens. Right. He doesn't draw it out. He's not teasing. It's like, you don't have to go, well, that's the way samurai movies are. I'm like, kind of like, yeah, okay, that's kind of feels like a cop out.
Yeah. I mean, it is, the longer the episode was going on, I was like, wow, they're really pushing this duel that they've been promoting. I mean, and maybe that wasn't Filoni's call. Maybe that's, marketing or
Right. Yeah.
whomever as to how you promote the episode, but they were really building up that lightsaber duel for weeks now, maybe you could say even months now, and that is not how it was presented. The marketing did not fairly represent the episode, which happens all the time, but I could understand why some fans might be disappointed with what they got, given how it was.
Well, and also that like they do this thing like, do you notice how he holds his lightsaber like Ewan would in the first part, and then he holds it like how Alec Guinness would? And it's like, oh, so now we're getting into poses? It's like, it's like you're trying to get an awful lot of credit for the preamble of something, and I don't know. I think that's the problem where they kind of run into with Rebels, and it's the idea like more and more some of these iconic characters are being brought into that, Lando, Leia, and I feel like they never give these big, everyone goes after the way Tarkin was, CGI brought back, and like whether or not, when he says this line, the voice doesn't work for me, and I mean, these are all fair criticisms, but I feel like I take more of an exception of the fact that you're resurrecting characters and bringing them into this cartoon thing, which they're telling me that I have to, well, I don't have to, but I mean, they're telling me that they want me to view as part of the saga of the whole Star Wars, thing that increases along with the comic books and the books, blah, blah, blah. And then I feel like they never give them the due. It's like Princess Leia was like, I almost forget that Princess Leia was on Rebels, and that shouldn't, maybe that's me, I guess, but I feel like I should be like, no, she was there for an important part of the story. That's why they interacted with these people. It's the idea, that why did we bring Obi-Wan back? Why did we have to tell people what he's been doing in the desert? Well, which obviously we've all known that he's just sitting out there waiting, and it's been speculated in comics and books and stuff, and that's fine, but you bring him in there and it's kind of like, I feel like, why is he interacting with Ezra? Doesn't he know how dangerous it is to have a half-cocked Jedi running around? He had that problem with Vader. It's like, him basically, Anakin went off, the war started and he wasn't done with his training. It's that same kind of problem that Luke had when he took off before his training was done. Wouldn't he go, ooh, Ezra, you're very impulsive, don't be impulsive. It just felt like it was there was no good reason to have him there, and that completely kind of ruined the whole impact of the episode. Again, I really think it should have been, it should have been like whatever they call it, a one and done, because then they never have to explain why they had this interaction, and it never occurs to Obi-Wan that maybe he should join the rebellion. And that way Maul gets a proper goodbye. And it could just have happened. Ezra and Kanan never know what happened to Maul. And just, they could always go like, well, he'll always be out there. And it wouldn't really matter. That, like, well, the audience knows that he's actually dead. They never needed to know what happened to him because he ran off, and it would have been a perfectly good ending, an ending in the sense of, those Jedi don't need to ever interact with Maul again because he's on another thing. And it's just that I just feel like total missed opportunity, but in the realm of what they did, there is good stuff. And I would say that the animation and some of the mannerisms of Obi-Wan, I thought were quite good. Although you had an observation that kind of put a chink in the armor of that, though. Yeah.
And so I mean this will connect a little bit to what you were just saying. So the other, I don't even know if, controversy is probably too strong a word for it, but other point of discussion that came up from the end of the episode is, as Maul is laying there dying, sort of in Obi-Wan's arms, I guess. he said, he figures out, Obi-Wan is there protecting someone, and he says, "Is it the chosen one?" And Obi-Wan kind of nods, and then he says, "He will avenge us." So some people are interpreting that to mean that Luke is the chosen one. Of course, in the prequels, it's Anakin who is considered the chosen one of whatever vague prophecy that is never explained, that's supposed to bring balance to the Force. And certainly Lucas's idea that it was Anakin, and that, by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, Anakin turns back to the light side just in time to kill the Emperor and thus bring balance to the Force. But some people are wondering if this means that, like, the makers of Rebels are implying that, well, maybe Luke is the chosen one, the real chosen one. They thought it was Anakin, but really it was Luke. And other people saying, well, no, as I've kind of just laid out, well, George Lucas says it's Anakin, so it's Anakin. Why, do you have any feelings, opinions about that debate? Because it also raises another interesting question, which I'll get to after you respond.
Well, it's the whole chosen one thing has always been very interesting, because I feel like it's like one of those things where it's like, I don't think they ever figured out what they wanted, because you can make an argument that Anakin was the chosen one, and that they just misread, the prophecy was misread. That the balance of the Force was, well, there's two, basically we start out, there's two Sith and like armies of Jedi. And what happens is Anakin essentially knocks it down to, when we end at the end of Revenge of the Sith, there is, as far as we know, there's Obi-Wan and there's Yoda. And then on the Sith side, there's Darth Vader and there's the Emperor. And so there's four players, and there's balance. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of that was the balance. They misread the prophecy and the fact that eventually you're going to get knocked down to the exact equals of each other. It's right. Like the corrupted satanic Sith Lord educator, full of enticing, seductive stories about power and the ability to cheat death. And, then we have Yoda, who's full of kind of platitudes, and Obi-Wan, who's kind of, in some ways, he's, Anakin has been like destroyed physically, destroyed emotionally. He's a prisoner trapped inside his armor. Obi-Wan, his own hubris, blah, blah, blah. He's trapped in the desert of his own making, of the fact that he thought he was going to be able to teach this impulsive, youngling or whatever, Padawan, or I don't know. It's that idea that now they're going to switch that back, and that Luke is the chosen one. I mean, I thought it was like they kept saying they refer to the original trilogy of hope.
Yeah.
They never speak anything about chosen people. He never says, "No, Luke, you are the chosen one to vanquish Vader. You can't leave." It's always, "You are our only hope."
Mm-hmm.
And hope is not determination. It's
right.
It's the idea, well, once we put everything out on the table, everything that we want is this guy, and that's where hope comes from. It's not like, oh, hope is I don't know. It's just that kind of, I don't know. It just felt like that's a weird shift. And it's also a weird thing to change the game in a cartoon that 95% of Star Wars fans probably don't watch, Right. It's a weird bit of baggage to unpack in a cartoon.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of wish they had used different language. I think and they're probably, they may be regretting that line just in the amount of like questions they're getting about it and discussion about it, right? They're like, no, we didn't. I don't think they meant that Luke was the chosen one, but the fact that some people think that that's what they meant, I'm sure they're like, no, we didn't want that either. The interesting question it raises is then, and you're sort of alluding to this too, is like, well, so then what is Luke? What is Luke? Not just in A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, but what is he now in Episode 7? 8 and 9, right? What is Luke's purpose? And I think it was someone from the Tumbling Saber Star Wars podcast that I saw kind of raise this on Twitter. Is like, well, all right, great. So Anakin's a chosen one. He has these 2 kids, one of whom we're finding out didn't really train much. She stayed in politics. The other one, wanted to become a Jedi, and he thought that was his destiny. But what is Luke's destiny? Like, what is he doing now? And we're kind of maybe getting hints that, well, he was to try to rebuild the Jedi Order, but maybe it's something else. Maybe we haven't figured out what his purpose yet. Maybe we haven't learned what his purpose yet. Maybe he hasn't figured out what his purpose is yet. And we're kind of glossing over what his purpose in the universe is now to jump to like, okay, well, now we have Rey, and now we're learning about Rey. And it's like, well, but did we ever figure out what Luke was supposed to do other than just help turn Anakin back to the light side? Is there anything else for him, or was that kind of the high point of his existence? Was that the high point of his purpose?
Yeah, it's like this line. I was thinking about this a lot because I do kind of like wonder. It's like, well, they've kind of reorientated Luke in this whole tapestry, and it's funny how obviously I don't think George had this in mind when he did it, but there are some ways that you can still sidestep this idea. Like there's all this conversation about, is Jedi plural, is it singular, which I think we've established did they establish it's singular, even though some of the foreign I
think it might be I don't know. I don't know if
what they said is that some of the foreign translations have it plural, but their intent is for it to be singular. That's what I'd heard. So
okay.
I'm not going to look it up, and so if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but let me just run this theory by people. So when Yoda's dying at the end of Jedi, he goes like, "When gone am I, the last of the Jedi will you be? Pass on what you have learned." He doesn't say, "Bring back the Jedi back to their former glory." I think he's, it's just that kind of idea where you can actually look at it. He was saying, teach the Force to people. Teach what it is, teach the techniques that I've taught you. He doesn't talk about like dogma. Of course, now that in 1982, 83, George had all this dogma hadn't been written. It was all kind of a, it could just be like he just wanted to be vague so he didn't have to contradict himself 15 years later, or 20 years later. But it's just that idea that, the Jedi, maybe the Jedi is a concept. It's going to be in that people have talked a little bit about, Rey may not be this traditional Jedi in the realm of how we've come to understand what Jedi are. It's like she's something different, and I think that can almost fit almost Luke is the last of a way of, a viewpoint of a view of the Force. And I don't necessarily think that that's in contradiction with how Yoda taught him. It's that kind of, they never, again, you couldn't really shoehorn a lot of the dogma that George came up with in the prequels into the original trilogy. I'm not going to assume he had these things in mind when he wrote it, but it's that idea that, it's like, I think you were saying that like Jedi Sith isn't going to be a concern going forward in these movies. And that's kind of why he's the last Jedi. He's the last, that idea of like, well, you're so inside the philosophical idea of like, oh, I'm a Jedi, I'm a this, that, you can't see the forest for the trees kind of idea. And it kind of, I don't know, it just feels to me like it's going to dovetail perfectly. But then again, I never felt like they every time they expand things, it's like the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Well, some people took away the idea that was, Palpatine's way of basically explaining to Anakin how his conception, like you're conceived from, either it was something I was experimenting with, being able to conceive a child inside of a woman, or Darth Plagueis was. They never explicitly say it. I feel like, well, they never really, they start to play around with it a little bit, and then they kind of back off. And I never know if that they're being coy, or they're like, oh, well, that you weren't supposed to read that much into it. It was just a story. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we're on the same page too, in that, they've established that neither Snoke nor Kylo Ren is a Sith. They're like, oh, well, they tap into the dark side, but that doesn't mean they're Sith. And so I think that the implication from that is like, well, Rey won't necessarily be a Jedi either, right? They're moving beyond that Jedi-Sith conflict, like you said, and so Luke, in that sense, is going to be kind of the last Jedi. And that maybe he'll come to the realization that, you know what, those labels are less important than just, the light side versus the dark side of the Force, and that it doesn't really matter if you're a Jedi or if you belong to some other sect. It's that light versus dark battle that's important, not the names of it. So yeah, I'm with you there. It's again, I think it's kind of an unforced error that they want to, I get maybe why they would want to put that in the episode, but it just feels like, yeah, you're raising unnecessary questions that I don't think they intended to raise, and so in that sense, it's just a little untidy. It's not necessarily sloppy, but it's just not the tidiest writing. The last thing I want to talk about with this episode is the voice acting. So this is the final appearance of Maul, which means it's the final appearance of Sam Witwer as Maul, and so he did an interview with StarWars.com, and he talked on Rebels Recon a little bit about that character and the fact that he's voiced that character for so long. I mean, I think even before Clone Wars, he had done the voice for a video game or something. I think he did the voice of the Emperor for a video game, and they called him in to do Maul. Oh well, he's
the voice of the Force Unleashed game. He's that character too.
Yeah, maybe that was his first Star Wars job. But, he's, when you consider when the Clone Wars started, I mean, he's been the voice of Maul for, almost a decade, pretty close to a decade. And for many people, I'm sure, many Star Wars fans, he's the voice of Maul, right? We don't really we hear Maul's voice a tiny bit, but in Phantom Menace, but certainly it's much more voluminous amount of dialogue he had in the Clone Wars and in Rebels. So, he was talking about a little bit of that. And in general, I mean, I think he did a good job with the voice of Maul, conveying the intelligence and the anger and whatever other character traits he went through over the years. And then you had Stephen Stanton voicing Obi-Wan Kenobi rather than James Arnold Taylor. James Arnold Taylor did the voice of Obi-Wan in the Clone Wars TV show. And they, the clip of the holocron, the clip of his message about Order 66 and telling the Jedi to avoid the temple on Coruscant, that was James Arnold Taylor, as young Obi-Wan. But then for older Obi-Wan, they use Stephen Stanton, who's done many voices on the show. He's done Tarkin. He does AP5.
He did Admiral Raddus in Rogue One.
Yeah,
he's
right. He's become kind of a utility player, voice actor for Star Wars now, and particularly Rebels. So I should say that I think on Rebels Recon, Filoni said it maybe had been his original intention to try to get James Arnold Taylor, but then Stephen Stanton was recording some other episode, and he was like, "Oh, I do a pretty good Alec Guinness," and Filoni was like, "Yeah, okay, let's hear it," and then he was shocked at how perfect it was. I would disagree with that, and much as I don't think he sounds anything like Peter Cushing when he does Tarkin on Rebels. I don't think he sounds hard. There might be like 2 words he says in this episode that sound a little bit like Obi-Wan, like Alec Guinness in A New Hope, but otherwise, there's some smattering of Jay Peterman from Seinfeld in there, which was like the first thing, like his first line of dialogue in that episode. I thought it was John O'Hurley, who's the actor who played, and I honestly, I was like, did they get John O'Hurley for this? Like, is this? I don't know why they would have. Like, it's probably not him, because why would they ever contact him to play Obi-Wan Kenobi? But it sounds enough like Peterman and like, you know, John O'Hurley calling the American Kennel Club dog show every Thanksgiving now, that I was like, like, who is doing this voice, and why does it? This is a weird choice for them to make. It just completely didn't work for me. I don't know. Maybe something gets lost when you're hearing it in person versus when it's recorded, and it's I can't. I don't hear any Alec Guinness in that voice. But I mean, even, you know, the inflections, his delivery of the dialogue was all fine. It just didn't sound anything like either Alec Guinness or Ewan McGregor to me, which is unfortunate for an episode as big as this is, at least in the Star Wars storyline. So I don't know. And I have nothing against Steven Stanton personally. Like, his Radis was good. Other things he's done, AP5 is fine. But yeah, first Tarkin and now Obi-Wan. It's like I just don't hear it. And maybe it's me, but I don't hear it.
Yeah, see, I wasn't as critical of it as you. Although when you say that, when you mention a specific name, when you John O'Hurley, it's like it's hard not to hear a little bit of what you're talking about. But honestly, on first blush, I actually was quite kind of taken aback about how good I thought it was. I'm not going to make a big case.
Well, so maybe it's.
I'm not going to debate you about it, because it's like I can't debate what your brain hears. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I should say too, when I saw The Dark Knight Rises in the theater, as soon as Bane started talking, I was like, oh, I don't know why he's doing a Jay Peterman impression.
Oh, see,
but
I always thought
sounds like Jay Peterman.
Who's the guy that's the Sean Connery-esque guy from the Venture Brothers?
Oh yeah,
that's that when
Colonel
I heard.
Gentleman.
Yeah, Colonel Gentleman. That's who I heard when I heard Bane for the first. That Colonel Gentleman, and mixed with a little bit of English comedian Matt Berry. But yeah, the voice is like, to me, it's like some of the, you know, like when they the animation, the profile. I mean, obviously you're looking at a, you know, it's not supposed to be photorealistic, but some of it I think they took a lot less liberty in depicting him than they would say in the Clone Wars or
yeah.
James Arnold Taylor's Obi-Wan is a very affected kind of voice that even
it's a little bit like in episode 3 when Obi-Wan goes to Utapau.
Yes.
But just his line, unfortunately, the wall. Yes. Like if he used that voice on every single line of dialogue, like that's kind of how I think James Arnold Taylor is Obi-Wan.
Right, it's a very formalized way of speaking. And I remember when they announced that Stanton was going to be doing the voice, it was kind of like, I don't know. It was, and I don't mean to get into like stuff that I don't know about, but there was like a lot of little Twitter people, little birds kind of bugging James Arnold Taylor, like, why aren't you doing the voice? As if somehow he made the decision himself. Obviously they went in a different direction, to the point where he was just like, guys, I'm going to take a break from Twitter because I'm tired of answering this is me paraphrasing. I'm tired of answering this question while I'm not in this episode. Wasn't my decision, kind of thing, where it's like, yeah, I don't know what his older Obi-Wan would have sounded like. Maybe in some ways it might have actually been more consistent with the animated Obi-Wan, and maybe in their attempt to try to like soften the blow of this iconic character being depicted in the animated realm, that they may have, like I said, I didn't have as much of a problem with Stanton's take on it, but yeah, I mean it's not spot on any more than the guy that did Tarkin in Rogue One was spot on. I mean, I don't. A lot of these people, they work as they get work doing a dialogue replacement in movies. I mean, that's the big thing about, like, in a movie when, I don't know, like a Tom Cruise movie when it's like he's off doing something and his next film and they need him to come in and say, put the cup down. They hire somebody just, and turns out it's got garbled or something. You get hired to do one line. And a lot of these guys, I think they do one line kind of stuff, but when they have to do sustained dialogue, the impression isn't necessarily as good. It's that ship has sailed. Alec Guinness. I mean, even Alec Guinness, I don't know how old he'd be now. He'd be 90. Maybe he wouldn't even sound like Alec Guinness. So it's kind of like, you got to make a compromise. I feel like they did everything they could to make it sound as good as they could. Obviously you had, made an association early on where you're just like, you couldn't, I think
maybe my brain just hears Jay Peterman all the time, because why wouldn't you? Why, there's nothing bad about that. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, maybe, like I said, maybe it's just me. I didn't hear it.
Yeah, like
but others may have. So
yeah, actually, that's a good thing. If you're out there listening, we would really love to hear your take on Stanton's Obi-Wan. Was it did it work? Did it not work? Where did you end up with it? Hosts at talkingbirdcast.com. So we feel like we're done with this episode. I mean, the Rebels.
Yeah, I think we're done with Rebels.
Do you want to do Aphra and then?
Yeah, because I know you. Up? I think we both have things we'd like to talk about with the last issue of Dr. Aphra.
Yeah, let's see.
So this is Aphra number 5. Yeah. Just real quickly, right? Aphra and her father and the evil droids and Black Chrysanthemum, who's the evil Wookiee, had been on Yavin 4, looking for evidence of the Order to Respect to. They see a map there or something. It sends them to a location of the Citadel of Rur being one of the old Order to Respect to. The Order to Respect to being either a sect of or a rival to the Jedi, depending on how you interpret history, apparently. And so they are there on this. They have just arrived at the Citadel of Rur when this when this issue begins. There are dead Jedi everywhere, just strewn, littered. The Citadel of Rur is littered with the bodies of dead Jedi. They find the body of Rur himself. There's some writing that refers to the eternal Rur, and they're like, well, he clearly wasn't that eternal. A group of Imperials has followed them there from Yavin 4, so they show up. Black Chrysanthemum is like, yeah, I'm not going to stick around for this. So he steals Aphra's ship, the Archangel 2, takes off. So it's just Aphra, her father, and the evil droids. The evil droids try to, burn alive some Imperials while they can. But other than that, their involvement's pretty limited. So Aphra and her father hole up in, is it like the generator room? Some big like engine room for this Citadel. It's the green light everywhere, very nice atmospherics, but it's just like a big room. They're kind of stuck there now. And they get to talking. Previously we had heard that Aphra's side of the story being that her father was so obsessed with the Ordo Aspectu and could focus on nothing else. So my wife left me. His wife left him and I guess took their daughter with her. Because he just wasn't around, he wasn't engaged in their lives in any way, and she resents him for that. We hear his side of the story, which is that, he's so obsessed with the Ordo Aspectu because the galaxy had become a dark place, a very dangerous place, and so he thought if he figured out what happened to the or to Espectu, he could bring the Jedi back and make the galaxy safe for his daughter. So they have kind of a nice moment there where she realized that he was trying to protect her, but that he wasn't just some absent-minded professor who ignored his family. He had a reason for doing it. And then at the very end of this issue, this huge droid wakes up and refers to itself as the Eternal Ruler. So the Imperials are kind of banging on the door, trying to get their way in, and now they're stuck in this room with this enormous droid called the Eternal Ruler, and they don't know if it's going to view them as hostile or what. So that is where we leave off Dr. Aphra number 5. So you've said that you've had a lot you wanted to say about this issue. So what did you think about it?
Well, again, it's kind of broken the I don't know. It's got that. It's this thing I talk about all the time about, when I have a story, I'm like, I didn't like the Aftermath books because it's like they were too much time spent with characters that weren't your regular gang. And it's like, what a missed opportunity or whatever. But I feel like Aphra is the first time that they've really gotten to the point in the new EU or whatever that I actually am kind of like, hey man, I don't need Darth Vader in this story. I don't need guest stars. I don't need Lando to show up. I don't need teenage Princess Leia. Like this Aphra has kind of cracked the code on telling a kind of a singular story, but within the realm of Star Wars. It's got, it's not okay. It's a lot of there's some of these daddy issue aspects to the story, and that's fine. It's a thing that Star Wars doesn't tend to deal with very often. It's because nobody's actually seems to be raised by any parents in Star Wars. It's like if you had parents, you're going to lose them when you're young, and you're going to get raised by an uncle or a crazy guy who has a ventilator hooked onto his suit or whatever, or a senator. So it's kind of like these interpersonal relationships. Again, obviously Aphra came from a somewhat broken home, but I mean, that's, to me, it humanizes it a little bit. I think the artwork overall is really good. I mean, it's not, at first, when I first looked at it, I was like, if I don't know if this is the kind of style I like a slightly more realistic, but I feel like it's, I guess Ken Walker is the artist, Kev Walker, sorry. Mm-hmm. And, it works for me because, again, this kind of like the Citadel of Rur is exactly the kind of thing that you feel that in 2017 that like they should be able to have in a Star Wars movie, but it's only happening in the comic books. Like, it's like this thing, it looks like a chunk. It looks like some kind of refuse of a Death Star blown up a planet, and like a city just is floating, and and there's these beautiful shots in, I don't know what number panel, but like there's this great shot when they're approaching the center. What is it called? The power core or whatever. It's kind of like a crystals are sticking out of the ceiling and the ground, and it's floating. You don't quite know what it is, but you get a great sense of scale. These are the kind of things that, you want in your sci-fi entertainment. And even on the next panel, when there's a shot of where the two droids stop mid thing and realize, there's Imperials approaching. So they go hide in a corner, and it's like 1, 2, 3. It's like 7 great like panels. It's like, it's a little experimental. I just feel like they're doing everything right with this story for a story that doesn't actually connect back to, the saga. It's interesting enough on its own where I don't ever think to myself, oh boy, they got to tie this back into the Emperor or something. It's like, no, it's doing very well on its own. Having like these kind of weird Imperial commanders of the week, which is kind of almost a conceit done in the original Marvel stuff, where they would always have like some Imperial officer who obviously wanted to distinguish themselves above the head and shoulders above everyone. They usually have an affectation like, oh, he's got a cyborg eye or he's got a mechanical arm, and this lady, she's got like this weird neck thing, and you know things aren't going to work out for her. It's like, because it never does. It never does for these Imperials. But that's that long time honored tradition of like Imperials that think that they're gonna, like, they're the ones, like Krennic, like I'm the one that's gonna basically come up with this concept that then the Emperor's gonna notice me. It's like, and we all know, maybe they don't and we do, that like you don't ever want to be on these people, on Vader or the Emperor's radar. It'd be better to be middle management than to actually distinguish yourself. So I like this. I like the art. I like overall, I think I said it's the the story's being told in a kind of a slow way, but we know that this is not a limited series. It's just going to be a monthly series. I haven't heard any tale that they're thinking of wrapping it up. So I'm like, I'm okay with that. I'm along for the ride.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially like you said, given that it's not a mini series, I really have nothing bad to say about the Aphra series. I don't know that. I mean, I think the Han Solo series was probably better, at least so far from what we've seen of Aphra. More. I think the Han Solo series was great. But the Aphra series, the pacing is really good. Issue 5 is probably a good time to have an issue like this, where it's more about these two characters having a conversation while like this craziness is going on around them. The art is good. The way the pages and the panels are structured and laid out, I think is good. The writing is pretty solid. I really, at this point, like I said, I have nothing bad to say about the Aphra comic. And there's not like a ton of action per se in this episode, but like, Black Chrysanthemum stealing the Archangel too is kind of interesting. Does he come back, or is this the last? This probably isn't the last we've seen of him, because Aphra owes him a ton of money, but maybe he just takes the ship as payment and that's his ship now, and we're not going to see him for a while. Or maybe he comes back and rescues them again because he doesn't want to lose all that money she owes him. There are multiple ways that the things set up in this episode, could pay off in this issue could pay off in the next issue, and even, further down the line. We have, we don't know, is this droid, it's certainly set up to be menacing. Is this actually going to be menacing for them, or is it going to turn and really be menacing towards the Empire? So the way they've set it up and the way this is kind of situated in the story, I mean, I think it's, like you said, it's having an issue like this at this point, it doesn't bog things down, or it is not the most action-packed issue, but it doesn't feel slow. It doesn't feel like sometimes the Darth Vader series felt where like, these people are just talking, and just pages and pages of two people talking. I don't get that same sense here.
Well, I mean, it's
and in general, I'm kind of interested to see where this story is going, because, like you said, sorry to cut you off, but
that's all right.
As you said, the fact is that these aren't two, quote unquote legacy characters. There's a connection to Darth Vader, but there's not really a connection, at least at this point, to like the events of anything that happens in the movies we've seen. And so I think it is a way for them, for the people making this comic and Lucasfilm generally, to kind of explore, okay, so how do other people in the galaxy kind of interpret the Jedi and what's going on with Vader and blowing up the Death Star, right? Like, how does this affect other people? How do other people kind of interpret and understand and either desire or not desire, the return of the Jedi Order coming back, or the Force, the light side of the Force being, for the good in the universe, and then, little pockets of the Empire, just some like kind of regional or just small time Imperial person, like how do they have to deal with all that stuff? So I think you're right. This is a really good way for them to explore all kinds of those sorts of things without having to be like, Lando shows up to save the day.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's kind of like, and this isn't a comic book, but, when the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. came out, I think that they'd sold that TV show to people like, all that exciting stuff in the movies. Well, these are the people that have to clean up about it. It's like, and I think another channel has one about like DC superheroes. That's like, it's like a kind of a comedic take of like inventors. And it's like, and those kind of things it becomes very apparent, obviously, that like without the superheroes, these kind of shows aren't very good. So that's why I think, say Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., they actually started, getting people to guest star on it. And, they had to insert these things to keep you interested. Whereas I feel like maybe that's because we've got, 25 issues. When did Aphra show up in Darth Vader? It was later on. No,
I thought it was pretty early because he needed her to, she was getting the 000 Matrix and he needed her to basically make the like droid army for him. So I feel like that was like either the first or an early storyline in that comic.
Well, you know what? I guess
mean, she disappeared for a while and came back, but
I mean, I guess the truth is that Aphra is like in the very best sense of the term, like a spin-off. You know what I mean? It's like, I know that's easy. You can just say, oh, it's a spin-off, but I mean, there is a kind of a natural, like even when they used to do spin-offs of TV shows, it'd be like,
is any word more thrilling to the human soul
than spin-offs? What?
Yeah, so the Simpsons reference. So the Simpsons episode where they showed all those 3 spin-offs from the Simpsons. It's like Wiggum in New Orleans and all that. That's how the episode started. It was Troy McClure walking through, I guess, the Museum of TV and Motion Pictures and looking at these posters of, all of these spin-offs, and then he goes, spin-offs! Is there any word more thrilling to the human soul?
Okay. Yeah, I guess there is a certain kind of, like, negative connotation, and now that, like, everything has a spin-off. I mean, I guess the show The Good Wife even has a spin-off now.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I guess in its purest sense, this is the spin-off that, what I think the people intend when they do spin-offs that they rarely achieve, with great, unlike great TV things like Enos and Flo's Yellow Rose, which I'm sure I'm dating myself on those.
Yeah.
They actually had a spin-off of the show Alice, which was a spin-off of a movie. And it's just like, okay, keeps Vic Tayback working, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, I guess that's about all I had on Dr. Aphra, unless you had something else you wanted to add.
No, I just, I'm again, we're in agreement on this, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with this Eternal Rur droid and where it goes after the storyline.
Yeah, so I guess we can wrap up there for the week. Does that feel good? Like a good place to stop?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if I have the goodwill to go through the last 2 Poe Dameron comics.
Yeah,
which are still not doing it for me. But I've talked so much smack this week. I feel like it would be cruel to talk the Poe Dameron.
Let's end on a positive note. Yes. Dr. Aphra is a good comic. If you want to get into Star Wars comics, that's a good one to
and it's so
go towards.
Again, she's got her fifth issue, so that means she's probably due for a what do they do, like 5-issue combos now, or well, no, they usually do, like when they do the trades, they do them by storyline or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
So if you haven't read it yet, it hasn't been out long enough to be on Marvel Unlimited or whatever. So, keep an eye out for it if you're looking for something interesting. So we've offered a lot of opinions this week, some good, some bad, some indifferent. And you might want to...
light on the news, but heavy on the views.
Exactly. And you might want to reach out and tell us how that last episode of Rebels went for you or whatnot, or you've got some theory you want to posit. Best way to get a hold of us is hosts at talkingbirdcast.com. We also have a Twitter. We're at Talking Birdcast. We have a website, www.talkingbirdcast.com. We have an Amazon affiliate link at www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. And I've explained it many a time before. I'm sure you all know how affiliate links work, and we always appreciate when you use it. I wish I could have used it when I bought that Ralph McQuarrie book, but I am disqualified because I own the account. Dang it. But I think that's all I have. You have anything you want to add at the end?
No, I mean, if you think there's something we didn't talk about this week that you wanted to hear us talk about, or if you are getting excited for Celebration,
Celebration.
or even if you're attending or not attending, but you hear that something's coming up at Celebration you're excited about, you want to hear us talk about, drop us a line and we'll talk about it on the episode.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm at first I was like, they're probably not going to do it, but I'm thinking that next month, a teaser is imminent. It would be nice if they threw the teaser up on the iTunes Rogue One that I've already purchased, but I don't think that's going to happen. You know something? I realized something. So far since Disney has taken over Lucasfilm, I have yet to actually see a Star Wars trailer in the theater. That's a thing. I've watched all of them online, so it's kind of I might have to. I can't
remember. Yeah, I'm not sure I have either, but that's because I don't go see movies much, and so I don't go see. I haven't seen other movies at which they would be playing the Star Wars trailer.
Yeah,
I don't think.
I think it's just that same kind of scenario. But anyway, that's like I said. If you're going to Celebration, let us know. Tell us what you're going to go do. We will not be there. Anyway, thanks for listening, and for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.
The perfect dog. My son asked a question, as little boys do, of me and my wisdom and all that I knew. Is there a dog that is perfect? He asked on a whim. Well, I thought about where to begin. He'd have ears that were floppy, all cropped and alert, and eyes that were sleepy, all perky and pert. He'd leap like a bunny, or sit in your lap, and run fast as horses, or up for a nap. A dog that is perfect would be covered in spots, or maybe one color, and then have spots not. They'd be small as a teacup or big as a house, with a nose that seemed flattened or long as a mouse. He'd swim and he'd hunt with a coat flying free, or be dainty and delicate, and he'd be a she. As I struggled to answer, and not with a clue, my son with a smile said out of the blue, with the wisdom of children, but he already knew. The dog that is perfect is the one next to you.